Catherine.
Hey guys,
good
it's
to see you.
NCTV. You are all set to go.
Thank you. Fritz, I see your name, but I don't see your face. Missing John and Nat. Is that right? Who else have we missing? Hey, Fritz.
Hi, everyone.
So just to reiterate, I got confused at the last meeting about what date and time our next full meeting is, and it's next Monday at the regular time at 4 o'clock. There's Nat, fresh from increasing our ferry fees. He's still standing.
No. I'm so busy. I'm very, very sorry. I'm trying to be 3 people. So I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Don't be sorry. Which one do we have, A, B, or C?
I gotta leave at 5 minutes of 4. So and I'll be back in 15 minutes if we're still talking.
I think we have to finish it for the next people to use the Zoom line. So I think we can do that. I see John. I don't know about Stephen, but I think I've got 1 minute after. We haven't heard anything from Stephen about his plans, but he's got capital committee and other things going on as well. So I don't know. I think we might as well get started. Welcome everybody. This is a meeting of the planning board, as you know, for those who may be watching online. This is not our regular business meeting, which will be next Monday at 4 o'clock for our usual review of various applications and permit requests. This is specifically limited to a discussion of upcoming annual town meeting articles, and it's a preliminary discussion within the board. There'll be subsequent hearing opportunities that really will kick in largely in January. Megan's going to provide everybody with another copy of the schedule, so you're aware of the dates that would be relevant dates for hearings coming up after the holidays. So just for the public who may be interested in that, this is really our effort to have an internal discussion. We've been through a full pass on many of these articles before. Some of them are ones that have been carried forward from prior year, actually, but that's the focus of the meeting today, and we're operating under the governor's rules in the face of the COVID pandemic. So I'll take roll just for the record here, and then we'll get started. Okay, board members, Dave Iverson.
Here.
Fritz McClure. I see your face, but you're muted, Fritz, so.
Here.
Okay, Nat Lowell.
Here.
John Trudell.
Here.
Judith Wagner here. We have 2 of our alternates, Campbell Sutton. You here, Campbell?
Yes, here.
And David Calhan.
Here.
And thank you. We have staff, Leslie Snell.
Here.
Andrew Vorse is here. Catherine Ansero and Megan Trudell.
Here.
Okay. So Leslie or Andrew or Megan, would one of you like to kind of give us an overview of what you know about further submissions? And what I proposed for the meeting today, we have to have ended by 4 o'clock because others need the Zoom line then. But we've been through many of these at our prior meeting targeting articles, so I'd suggest that we focus on ones we haven't really talked about in this cycle, but invite staff to give us kind of an update of anything you may know that would be helpful to orient us. Don't all speak at once. Leslie.
Okay, so you all have the list of draft article concepts in your packet. Most of those we've gone over. There's some, as you mentioned, Judith, that need to be gone over in much more detail today. As far as new citizen petitions that have been submitted, there are 7, I think, and most of those are pretty straightforward. So I don't see anything there that's going to generate a lot of time for the board to discuss, when we get there. Right now, the schedule is that all of the courtesy mailings for the map changes being brought forward by the planning board have either already gone out this week or will go out today. So we're on schedule for that. That mailing has a letter, it has a map, it has information about the zoning change, it has my contact information, so the property owners can contact me if they have questions. That's been, really helpful over the years, and getting that out in a timely manner is particularly helpful. That letter states that there will be a public hearing scheduled by the planning board in early January, and to, watch the INM for that they won't be further notified. We don't have an exact meeting date for that yet in January, but it will be sometime early, so we can get ahead of the schedule. And the time frame, which you all have been given, I don't have it right in front of me right now, but it's pretty tight going into the new year to get all of the public hearings wrapped up and recommendations to the FinCom by, I think, sometime early to mid-February. So we'll have a busy January. Hope no one has plans.
Well, and we don't know how the pandemic's going to progress and whether that's going to affect the timing of town meeting or the format of town meeting or anything like that. So it may be kind of hurry up and wait. One thing, Leslie, maybe you'd clarify for citizen articles that we've reviewed previously. Will those citizens, they'll have to come and do another hearing. Can they modify their submissions? For example, we've got a number of those that board members will remember involved, say, parcels in Tom Nevers or parcels in various places that they'd like to initiate changes in zoning off Pulpus Road, for example. Will they have to, they're carried forward formally from the fact that they couldn't be heard last year, but do they get another shot to modify if they choose to do that?
So this is new for all of us. It's a procedure that we haven't experienced before. But I think the way that will work is unless the person has submitted a new article, which I know one of the petitioners has submitted something different for this year for the same properties. The article that was submitted last year is what we'll carry forward. That's what we'll advertise and have the public hearing discussion about. So you can, of course, make some changes as long as it's within the scope in your recommendation if you want to, but it's my understanding the article as submitted is what will be moving forward.
Okay, thank you. And we welcome Stephen Welch, our alternate. He's out there in the cold, windy weather. Looks like Jim Cantori. Keep that snow blizzards away for a while longer, please. Did anybody on the board have questions about process or timing or kind of the game plan of what we need to do in reviewing ATM articles? No, good on that. Okay. Where would you suggest we start, Leslie? I know there were a number we talked about. I think this was at a meeting that Andrew was away, so I'm not sure. I think it was you and Megan and Catherine who were there, but some that you had raised that we said we think it's not worth proceeding with those right now. So those are no longer on your list. Is that right?
That's correct. Those are no longer on the list. And if you want me to just quickly sort of go through the list and tell you where we are, I think I can do
That'd probably be a good idea.
Okay, so on the 3 RC2 phase out articles, we have already been talking with some of those owners and the mailing has gone out for those. So I don't think those need any further discussion today. We will just schedule the public hearing for early January. Same with the next item in the RC phase out. What we included in the article is what your motion was for last town meeting. That mailing has gone out and I don't think that needs further discussion today either. The R1 phase out, this article would phase out all remaining SR1 in Sconset. That one also I don't think needs any discussion today. The mailing has gone out to all those property owners. The citizen map amendments or other zoning map amendments, the citizen articles from last year, as we just discussed, those will be re-advertised as submitted for last year. Those don't need any discussion today. The next 3 articles, those are map changes that you've talked about before and the mailings have gone out for those. I don't think those need any other discussion today. The next item, technical amendment to the zoning map. You all discussed 8 Red Mill Road and adding 3 or 4 other properties that had the same exact zoning issue. So we have done that. That does not need any more discussion. The zoning bylaw amendments. So
Yeah, that's where we really are today, right?
yeah, so the modification to the swimming pool, that's something you all need to talk about. The Cannabis Craft Cooperative, I have reached out to the chairman of that group. I haven't heard that they've had any substantive discussion, so I don't think anything will be coming out of that, but I'm not sure. And again, that's just something that if we get it from them, we'll schedule the public hearing and you can talk about it then. The storage containers, you all discussed that before, but I didn't get clear direction on that. So that needs some additional discussion. The technical amendments, I have prepared that article and I don't think that needs any discussion today unless you all have something new to add that didn't come up before. So that's where we are.
Okay, and then the last items there about real estate, didn't we talk about Codfish Park last time?
We did provide you all with the map, but those are not articles that the planning board will make any recommendation on.
Okay.
That's really more of an FYI that staff is working on that.
Okay.
With the select board and the real estate committee.
All right, so let's start with swimming pools. I know from talking at least to one of you that there's been some change in views within the board about how to proceed, but Leslie, would you summarize where we left off or what was in the proposal that we had a consensus for last year? We were focusing on the area closest to the downtown. This is my effort to recall the details. There are no swimming pools allowed in the historic downtown, but we were looking at nearby areas that were not within the formal downtown on the theory that they're functionally, it's hard for people to see the difference between the downtown and those perimeter areas. And we were, well, I don't mean to preempt you. If you can summarize, please go ahead.
Okay, so on the last 2 pages of your packet, there's information about the pools. The second to last page has your motion from last year, which would add additional restrictions to swimming pools in the R1, SR1, R5, and R5L districts. And it would increase the minimum lot size from 5,000 to 7,500 for swimming pools. And it would increase the side yard and rear yard setbacks from 5 feet to 10 feet for the pool and the equipment. And I think the thought with the board on that, or at least for some of you, was that if you had an oversized lot, you would have to choose between potentially dividing the lot or having a pool. And I think, Judith, what you said about, the R1 and SR1 in particular being somewhat indistinguishable from the ROH and SOH is true as well. And in Sconset, the SR1 district is now in a different article, and we're proposing to put that in SOH.
And I think too, Leslie, I would just point out to everybody, I think the version you've given us of pools by zoning district updated as of September 2020. We can see that where there's strikeouts and increases in numbers. We've been in kind of a quiescent period to some degree because of COVID, but you can see that there's substantial increases in swimming pools in some of the areas, not necessarily the areas we were focusing on, like Lug 2 and 3 that are more like rural estates. There's a lot of growth in that, and R20 and Lug 1. So if anybody has questions just before we get started on either what was proposed last year or on Leslie's data, this would be a good time to feel free to ask those. And then I'm going to call on Nat to share his thinking because I know his thoughts have changed. Campbell, you're muted.
Through you, Madam Chair, I just had a question, Leslie. In the data list that you gave, R5L is not included. Is that because it's under R10L?
It's not included because we currently have not mapped that district.
Okay.
That's created, it's in the bylaw, but we have not put it on the map yet.
Okay, I was just trying to get an idea of how many pools were in each area that we're thinking about affecting. Because it doesn't, like there's a lot in there right at the moment, but.
With that in mind, Leslie, could you just refresh for anybody who may not have that on the top of their head, what the point of R5L is and where that would be?
So R5L may take the place of some current R1. The difference between R5 and R5L is that duplexes are allowed in R5. They're not allowed in R5L. There may be other changes between those two as well, but I think that's the big one. And that's the one that comes to mind. So I think, for the smaller lots that aren't necessarily appropriate for ROH, and maybe R5 is a little too dense, R5L is an in between.
Okay, just checking.
Can I ask a question to staff? Judith?
Yes, please.
Can I just ask Leslie a quick question on that?
Yeah,
Leslie is oh, I'm sorry. The R5L, Judith, Leslie, is that the same as what we did over at Mizzenmast? Does a second dwelling need a special permit, or is that just a completely different L? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not going to follow the other L's that we came up with? Remember how we did that over at Mizzenmast? You have to have a special permit to build a second dwelling now.
I do remember that. Let's see.
I'm just curious because I just want to make sure that we don't have, so R5L has a different, glitch to it than R10L does.
So
the answer is yes.
Okay.
R5L requires a special permit for a second dwelling.
As well as the duplex, Andrew.
And then a duplex is not allowed in R5L.
Okay, great. That's good to know. The future stuff.
And one other thing that occurs to me, again, just kind of setting the table for the conversation here. I think many of you will remember that the FinCom voted not to support our proposal the last time, and Leslie and Andrew were there for a couple of those meetings. I was there for at least one of those. Maybe we should refresh the board on kind of how that played out or what their thinking was and what their role is.
Yeah, we were there, and I mean, it's somewhat unusual for the finance committee to take a contrary position on zoning articles that they certainly can, but it's rare that it's happened, and they chose to do so on this particular article. I think we made a number of arguments before them. I think they were focused on what they perceive to be financial impacts. Is that right? At least that's what was said publicly. I think there was an effort by staff, by the chairwoman, to have them revisit that and reconsider, and those were unfortunately not successful.
There were questions, as I recall, and Leslie, I think you probably had to answer them, so you recall even more so, about how many parcels there were in the various districts that would be affected by the proposed changes. And so they were, I think, bearing in mind a lot about real estate development and the number of people who had lots who might want swimming pools. And so they were asking for numbers. And I think Leslie did a heroic job on the spot. And I tried to do my part too, to explain based on the data we had in front of us. But I don't think I don't want to make judgments on their thinking, but they also had gone back and reviewed some of our prior videoed meetings. They hadn't really taken the opportunity to go back over really 2 years of discussion on this. So they, some of them raised a point David Callahan has raised, like, well, why didn't you survey everybody about what they wanted here? But they pretty much didn't want the constraint on development that would, in their view, result from implementation of this. Now, how that would play out among the public remains to be seen. The arguments I made were things like, we had a consensus of the board at that time. We had weighed all that. We were looking particularly in the area close to the historic district downtown and similar spaces. Told them my own view, which is, when you have a lot of swimming pool development, that's impervious surface, that then means you're looking at more runoff, and we've been having more storm events that result in damage to nearby property. If that's what we're fostering, that it's not just roads, it's if you can't really absorb the water into the underlying soil and that kind of thing. And also that, in my view, this also, and I know this may not be shared by everybody on the board, but in my own view, it was the more we develop every place near the downtown that might be susceptible to affordable housing on bus lines and things like that, the more we were really taking out of the land stock the opportunity to have more affordable housing available. But so in effect, I think I did not expect last year to have that much of engagement with the FinCom. It was also particularly troubling to me because they acted, Leslie asked them to delay action. I was out of town at a long-standing obligation for another board, and they went ahead and acted without even giving me the chance to be there. And I met with their chair to explain and ask that at least they give me the courtesy on our collective behalf to hear me out, as well as our staff, who I knew had done a lot of work in preparation and were had given an initial presentation, but I thought we needed more dialogue. But at the end of the day, it really was pretty clear they didn't want to have dialogue. They had definite views. So I think that may be relevant to some of you, to the degree that you think that when we submit proposals from the planning board, that you want to take into account whether there be opposition from FinCom or other participants in the public dialogue in so far as you're concerned. So Leslie or Andrew, did that capture your best recollection? Andrew's nodding, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, anybody else? Nat, I want to turn it
Yeah.
to you, 'cause I know you have definite thoughts here.
It's not so much change of heart or anything. It's more about, like you said earlier, it's been like over a year since we talked about this. That's like 10 years, it seems. I guess a couple of things. First thing I wanted to say is the original article was for bigger than 7,500. So I don't remember what it was. I think it was 10,000, but I'm not 100% sure.
I think that's right.
Was it? Okay. So the original concept, I should say. So what I think the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, what is a big lot in R1 in everybody's mind? Like, what is big? Well, I would consider, 11 or 12,000 a big lot in R1. Okay. So the key is, where do we want to draw the line if we want to draw it for what becomes sort of de facto ROH, even if it's not, if they subdivided. And the second thing is, and this is something that was brought to my attention without me realizing it, after we had sort of, kind of concluded our meetings, was I honestly didn't know what a plunge pool was until I went and looked at some, because I just didn't notice the difference and how small they are. So that was my other concern, is that what's happening with these landscapers is they're coming up with ways to make very small pools outside of ROH. They have a different set of regulations. I'm talking about in these small yards. So to Fritz's concern, and I'm in complete agreement with the setback issue, I'm definitely in favor of increasing the side yard and rear yard setbacks so that the pool edge can't be at the property line, in theory. At the setback line. Sorry, I didn't mean to say property line. Because right now, a swimming pool, right where the water starts, can be right at the setback line, because the hardscaping is not considered ground cover and it can be in the setback. So that is something I think we should focus on in this article, as far as that goes. But the plunge pool issue is interesting, because you look at these pools. There's a few I looked at down on in Sleepy Hollow down there at Vestal, which is in R1. You wouldn't know how deep they are. You just know how the size. They're small, but they tuck right in the way they do it. Okay, so that's my concern, that we'll be sort of kind of making it so you can't have one of those in a 7,400 square foot lot or something. It's complicated to start getting into that. The other issue that I have is, the survey thing. The survey with the ROH was pretty extensive. There was a lot of reasons for that. I'm not as concerned in the sense of the survey part. I'm concerned with how much we have planned for ROH in these outskirt areas like New Lane, like Quaker, Prospect, you know what I mean? The outskirts of the ROH. And will this create a frenzy of people trying to put pools in that they don't even want? It's a little bit kind of like bigger than a zoning change when you think about it in some ways. I'd be willing to, and I'm sure that somebody else will have something to say about this, maybe lowering the 7,500 to slightly smaller, so that a 10,000 square foot lot can't be turned into 2 5s. That's a problem. And that's sort of where I was thinking at the beginning of this. I don't think you should be able to just A&R a 10,000 square foot lot and make 2 5s and jam 2 pools and jam 2 houses just for fun, which is where my, sort of thinking was at the time. But then when you go look at a 6,500 square foot lot with a small swimming pool, you sort of say, well, what's wrong with that? That's where it gets difficult. And, I just don't want to be too onerous, and have a negative reaction towards this board to that level. But I definitely think there is definitely work to be done on the setbacks and possibly with the actual minimum size situation. As far as the zoning stuff goes, we have to figure out what our plans are for the, for R5, where are we gonna, because the R5 is gonna be the new R1. I mean, there's a lot of different pieces in that too that play out. So that's all I have for now.
Can I ask you a follow-up, if you don't mind?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, Judith.
In terms of the setbacks, the concern you voice may apply beyond the districts we targeted here initially when you're talking about concern about having pools right on setback lines. Are you still focusing on only the districts we had flagged before?
Well, that's something that's a staff level question, and that I know what you mean, Judith. What you're saying is like in R10,
right,
to add 5 feet, right? And that's something that good. And thank you for bringing that up, because that was sort of another thing I had in my mind during this whole process. Is having Leslie and Andrew look at that as far as like I don't even know what the side. I don't have that stuff in my head, but when you increase the setback, it forces the architect to make the pool a little smaller, a little bit more hidden, a little bit more, creative, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, part of why I'm asking too is the issue about runoffs, because I've seen it not just here on the island, but in North Carolina, where you've got hard surfaces, be they pools or asphalt or whatever, and you end up with flooding into the adjacent areas because the water can't be absorbed. And I wanted to ask Fritz about, say, Crack's perspective on that as well, because I don't think, especially with what appears to be a growing norm that everybody's into having pools here, I just think that's a lot harder to cure after the fact. If you've got, what are you going to do with the flooding of adjacent property owners? That's grounds for disputes. I know some about the law in that area, and it's really messy. So that's the perfect place in my mind that you really need to regulate, so it's not to make things worse if you can avoid it. But thank you. So your view on that is to have staff look at that, see what we know about existing patterns or tendencies.
I'm just, I don't think we should go beyond R10 in that discussion. I don't think, but at the same time, you're right. It ties in to the situation of this, the whole setback issue, as far as if R10 basically has the same issues as R1 does with the setbacks. I think we should look at that.
Okay, I'm seeing John looking like you want to speak. John, am I reading you right?
Well, no, I just, again, I know this is round, I think 2 or 3, and
at least 3.
Yeah, so I think we've kind of tweaked on this as much as we can, and if it's going to go, great. If it's not going to go, 3 strikes, we're out. And I'm speaking from someone, as I had stated before, I love pools and I don't want to be the person to say you can't have a pool because you're in this zoning and I can have one. But to that degree, I think we've modified these zonings to a certain degree where it almost is, it gives the person the luxury of saying, hey, I have a 10,000 square foot lot in an R1. It's a 5,000 square foot zoning. Although, if I'm going to have a pool, I have to have 7,500. So we've made it to a point where you can have your cake, but you can't eat it too. You can get the subdivision of the 5,000 each, or if a pool means more to you, then that 7,500 is a minimum for a pool. So you can get that pool, but you can't have both. You can't subdivide and squeeze two pools in right on top of each other. And, with the setbacks now increased to 10 feet and 10 feet on either side, we're really kind of, we're allowing it, but we're making it very difficult for someone to really explode and abuse. And I think we've had an adverse effect over the last few years because of the threat of potentially stopping pools. I really, really believe that we've had many, many more pools that were applied for and installed when really at that point they might not have wanted to do. And again, I don't want to tell somebody they can or can't have it, but I think the restrictions that we put in this article are sufficient enough to say, if we can't get this, then okay, we gave it our best shot. And I'm fine either way. If it passes, great. If it doesn't pass, oh well, we had a good shot at it. But we have been discussing this a lot for 3 years, and as a board, by us signing our name to it, we don't have the full endorsement of the finance committee, and I kind of think it's putting a little egg in our face where it looks like we're jamming it down. And it would be nice to have the backing of the finance committee saying it's not just about finances, it's about all the other areas and storm runoff and environmental issues, things that we've brought up. So, that's just it. It's really just a comment. I'm happy to go along with the board or against the board, whatever. I'm really not one-sided or another. I feel hypocritical getting a pool, having a pool, and telling somebody they can't have a pool. So with these restrictions or the limitations that we've added in, I hope that is enough to either get it passed or not get it passed. And one way or the other, I hope we can move on.
Thank you. Fritz?
I agree. Originally I came at this, whatever it was, 3 years ago. It was very broad. It was not popular with certain groups, and it didn't go forward. I think, and I appreciate last year what all of you did to really think about this, because I think there are legitimate issues about having swimming pools on very small lots, very close to other properties, and it has, and as far as I'm concerned, it has nothing to do with finances and the finance committee. It's just simply having too much activity in a small lot so close to your neighbor, and you've seen it on Upper Main Street. You can walk around, where they are. This doesn't, as far as I know. We're talking about pools. We're not talking about spas. So, I haven't actually sat down to figure out how big a spa is. So, what you could put in there. Nat just raised the use of the term plunge pool. I don't know whether a plunge pool is a small pool that's bigger than a spa, or is it a spa? But to the extent, we haven't said you can't have a small spa, and personally, my view is that can be just as obnoxious if you're a neighbor as a pool. But I'm not going to try to expand this, and I'm not going to try to argue that we ought to expand it and go back in the other direction. But I just feel strongly that we spent a lot of time Nat, and
Yeah,
John,
that's true.
you came in with, changes and, those were agreeable. And so I just feel we've gone through the discussion. I think it's really unfortunate that the finance committee did what it did. And is there any prospect that they won't do the same thing coming back at it again? If they have a right to revisit it, I don't know whether maybe this just goes forward automatically, but I think that was very unfortunate. I don't know. I don't know where the select board came out or would come out on it. But it seems to me that from the first time around, the planning of the select board said there seems to be some legitimacy to some of the issues, and you guys ought to consider it. And I think we considered it, and we came back with something that was really quite narrow, very, small lots. I think there are legitimate, for all the things that are in the planning board comment, I think, noise and light and all of that, I think those are very legitimate. I think there are a lot of people who would agree with the direction we're going in. Whether all of those people are going to stand up or how they're going to vote at the town meeting, I don't know. I'm sure there'll be very vocal opposition from the real estate community and from the builder community. But I think I feel the same way that what John expressed. I just assume, let's not just kill it and just give up. I think we ought to say we thought about this, we've gone through it, we were unanimous, we came to this, we think it's fair, and let's just go forward and see what happens. I mean, that's my view.
Dave Iverson, and then I'll go to Stephen and Dave Callahan and back to Campbell.
Listen, there's been so much hard work and thought put into this, and I think that we need to stay away from an outright ban, and I kind of like where we've ended up on this. I think that we've created a situation where people need to be more thoughtful about where their pool goes. They still get a pool if they're within the size range, and the setbacks, expanding the setbacks, I think, again, is going to force people to be more thoughtful about where their pool goes. And I think that in some senses, it might not go all the way to where this thing began from, what we were looking to do, but I think it's at a more acceptable level where people will see it as, okay, we need to be more thoughtful about this. This isn't unrealistic, and I like it. I mean, listen, I think that we could, and I'm not going to argue for it, but I think that we could almost even increase the setback more, and cause people to be even more thoughtful about going about it. But I think that probably would be pushing it too far. So, I mean, I support this. I know Nat wants to make the square footage less than 7,500, and I don't necessarily have a huge problem with that. I think that, we definitely don't want people to take a 10,000 square foot lot in R1 and subdivide and put two pools in and
Yes.
stuff there. So,
Yep, especially when we're going to change it eventually.
yeah. So, I like,
Yep.
where we are now might not be the full package we wanted, but I think it's going to be a more acceptable package by the community. And I think it goes pretty far in addressing some of the concerns that we set out to address.
David Callahan, Stephen, one of you want to speak?
Yeah, David, you want to go ahead?
Go ahead, Stephen.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Madam Chair. I know you all have spoken. I guess one of the things I'm considering here is, and I'm not looking, it's not that I think the planning board agendas month to month are a little light or anything like that. But this particular area, first of all, I agree with everything that's been said, and including John's kind of one side of the fence or the other, which I think is appropriate given the issues at hand. But I think where I'm going with this, and I'm wondering, is if the language were to stay as it is, keeping in mind the idea of perhaps the finance committee also perhaps easing in with landowners not having surveys, the tradespeople, the concept that that this would be applicable to a building permit after September 30th, or unless accepted by special permit at the planning board. And the idea there is that it begins to get this out there. It may make it more palatable. It may not. I have given it a lot of thought. I would like to hear from our professional staff as to whether they think that that would make any sense. But to me, it gets it on the books. I want to back up a second. This issue of whether to put a pool in or pull a permit or not is already out there. At the HDC, we've approved with limited restrictions, which I want to address too. Perhaps 30, give or take 5 in the last month or so in these areas. I'm not suggesting that they're going to be installed, but this is, people are aware that this is out there, and it may take some of the pressure off if it were a special permit approach as opposed to just a absolutely you can't do it. I do want to underscore, I think the concept of giving people a choice of whether to keep one lot and have a pool or subdivide and have 2 lots in these zones, I think is a good approach. It gives them an option. I think that with respect to the planning board special permit, I think it's fair to say that the planning board has been neither unduly permissive or unduly restrictive. And I think people would think that they're getting a fair shake if they came in. And then lastly, I just quickly say that with respect to the HDC, we, when I sit on an application, but the HDC overall is extremely limited. And one of the tools that's being deployed, and frankly, I think it's certainly been stated at HDC by more than myself, and perhaps by more than supermajority, is this element of using screening large plant material to prevent the visibility of these pools. That's our tool. And unfortunately, what it's doing is it's creating a different nature of the historical setting in the town area, in these R1 and SR1 and R5 and SR5 zones, where you have basically a very dense, tall plant material obstructing the view into yards, where typically it was a Rose of Sharon or a group of lilacs and a picket fence. Now it is cedars or Leyland cypress or some other, arborvitae, sheared and tight. And that is changing the character of the downtown area in these zones. So I'd ask you to maybe keep that into consideration too. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. David Callahan?
Yeah, was never a big proponent of this article. However, I've kind of grown to accept it, I think, over the years. And I do like the increased setbacks. I think that that's a positive. I had written on my notes, the special permit would be a way to do this, as well, instead of just that strict, I can't do it. I have built a pool on a 5,500 square foot R1 lot. It happened to abut parkland. It didn't affect any neighbors or anything, but to not have been able to do that on that particular property, and I built a ranch house there, would have been, I think, a real stealing of property rights. It didn't affect anyone. And that's just where special permits could come in instead of having this hard and fast rule, and give the planning board the power to take a look at how the neighbor is, how the landscaping is, et cetera. I think it's a bad way to stop a subdivision in a way. I'm not all for these 5,000 square foot lots with a house and a swimming pool, but I just don't think this is the right tool for that. And maybe the special permit process would work better on that. I also don't think you're not stopping a lot of the runoff issues because people will still have patios and that kind of thing. The pool actually absorbs the water, through a winter cover. So I think the patios and things that are going to go into yards regardless, you're not going to change that with this. We've talked about this, I think, long enough, as most people have said, and whether the finance committee backs us or not, it's probably time to put it forward and let the people decide. That's it.
Thanks, David. Campbell, did you have other questions or comments?
I guess I just have a couple of things. I mean, I thought a lot of work had been done, like people have already commented, to get this where it was. And I thought when we had initially submitted it, for the most part, I understand some people weren't, 100% on board, but we felt it was a good compromise that could be helpful. I would just like to point out that one of the differences I view between the FinCom and the Planning Board is the Planning Board is, in my view, supposed to take in issues of quality of life for all the residents of Nantucket, not just realtors, not just developers, and not just renters, but everyone's quality of life. And I like the 7,500 square feet with a 10-foot setback because I really think that helps protect. I think it helps increase the value of the 7,500 square foot lot because it does give you the opportunity for a pool, which could help people, realtors and developers rethink their larger pieces of property and how they could go about selling it. Also, I guess I'd like to just pipe in a little bit. I think if we were to look at this article as being guidelines to swimming pools instead of restrictions and get away from the concept a bit of, oh, you can't have a pool. We're trying to make it so you can't have one. No, we're just trying to put some guidelines in place about when you have a pool, what is the environment in which that can happen? As Steve was referring to, the change in the R1 of the aesthetic and the feel of the area is often based on the fact that a pool is going in, you get a 5,000 square foot lot that's max built out with the house and then maximizing the pool. So you essentially have no room, which you've heard me say this before, because you've also got to have your parking lot for your 2 and 3 cars. So, and then you have to add this screening in. So I can see where just trying to have the pool in the R5 is really creating a strain on the property itself. Anyway, I could go on and on. And with the plunge pool, I think the difference between a spa and a pool tends to be gallonage and whether it's heated or not. Well, it can't even really be that because pools are heated. So like I think of a spa as being about 3,000 gallons, whereas I think of a pool is in the neighborhood of 28,000 gallons and above, something like that. And I think that was really all the notes that I had. I know that I would stand up at town meeting and I will speak for this. And I think that the finance committee, being just concerned about real estate and the price of real estate, has overlooked the possibilities of improved value on these larger lots and keeping the R5s maybe a little bit more restricted to year-round housing and things like that we're so desperately in need of. Okay. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you. A lot of wisdom here. I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing that Andrew and Leslie have thoughts about special permits. Aren't there some special permit pool issues that go to the ZBA? And we may have talked about this before, but I'm thinking you're not thrilled about special permits, but maybe I'm mistaken.
No, Madam Chair, you are correct. Adding special permits may seem like not a big deal to you all, but it will be when you have multiple ones. And I mean, many of these issues turn on, who's the neighbor, who doesn't like it, who does. And that's clearly the you know, what has happened in Mattucket. Mattucket, the VR district, special permits go to the ZBA, and I think they're very, very unhappy to have received that duty. Because a lot of this, and again, there's discussions about things that are really difficult to enforce, about lighting and all kinds of things that they're unrealistic. They basically, you know, we just don't have the level of staff or the level of access. So, I mean, if you're going to do something like that and you're going to allow waivers from the standards under certain circumstances, I suppose that's something we could deal with. But you know, I think I don't know about this plunge pool, because spas and hot tubs are allowed in every district and they're routinely permitted. There's no issue with that. They're permitted in the ROH district now, and they're the substitute for pools, I think. So, you know, I would not advocate making this more complicated and more staff, you know, creating a bunch of more staff needs that keeps coming up. And there's really no budget behind this to start adding extra enforcement personnel for some of these things. You've got to think that through. You just can't make bylaws that require additional staff without thinking through, you know, how that's all going to be paid for, because it just won't be met and people will be disappointed.
Leslie, did you want to comment? And I know if Andrew, that was fairly passionate in your scale of expression of viewpoints, Andrew, I get that, but Leslie, I imagine you agree, but if you have other thoughts or if you disagree, Andrew won't beat on you, I'm sure, nor will we.
No, I totally agree with what Andrew said, and I'll just point out that the definition of hot tub and spa in the bylaw, you know, has specific size and gallonage and depth requirements, and so does swimming pool. So you have to take those two together to decide, you know, is it a pool or is it a spa?
I'm just going to offer a couple observations. One is I'm hearing a desire to go ahead. I think, although Nat may disagree with this, I think Nat was being thoughtful and bringing things to our attention. So I'm not assuming anything about votes here. I'm just kind of reading the commentary. I think we typically take to heart what advice we get from staff. So I think we just heard some strong advice about special permits. Third thing, I think we want to do something, move ahead or put it away. And my sense was everybody's thought enough about it. We think we should do something about this. So the question is, stand pat with what we have or do something else. The theme for a while there was move to special permits, but speaking for myself, if staff thinks that's a non-starter, I think we need to weigh that heavily. So here's the other thing that occurs to me in terms of FinCom is if we go back with the identical thing we had last time, just as a matter of institutional behavior, I imagine they'll say, well, we told you already what we think, and they won't necessarily change their mind. So I know it's risky to even think about this, but I've begun to wonder whether we would want to say something about setbacks in certain districts. I mean, that's like the least remaining consensus point, to say you have to have setbacks. And in addition, if there were some provisos about buffering effects on taking into account slopes or other things like that, I don't know whether there's a way that that can be dealt with administratively without having to go through special permit, but to give discretion to staff to provide guidance, as I know you've done on things like fencing in places where people don't necessarily want it, or things like that. But I don't know whether it's a good idea to try to separate out the issue of the, I think of it as a buffer setback in any event, and to possibly include one more district in that, as was talked about. I think the question of subdividing lots into two 5,000 square foot lots, as David said, this is kind of a backdoor way to regulate that on the face of it, even though we're also honestly looking at problems that come when you put too much intensity there. So how about let's just have another round of discussion about where next.
Madam Chair.
Yes, John.
Just a comment. I think the way we have it right now, I fully support, and I'd be willing to give it one more shot. And I'd be curious if it would be beneficial to, we've done this in the past, put out a little one-page little pamphlet saying, here's our article. If we're going to support this, we can make a note. We can make note that this originated from a discussion, selectmen. So we've explored it, tweaked it, and we're ready to put it out. And this is our, kind of last shot at it. I also would maybe grab the bull by the horns and make comment that, you know what, we don't feel that this is a financial, situation. We're addressing this for other reasons, such as environment. And in essence, we're really putting the finance committee on the back burner, whether they support or not support. We're eliminating the debate that this is financial. So I think maybe we just go with it as it is, with the 7,500 square feet and the setbacks, and we maybe make note that it's not a financial decision. It's more about the surrounding areas, the neighborhood, the condensed neighborhood, and the environmental issues and runoff.
Just so you know, they weren't interested in that the last time, but I think you're also saying we should go ahead whatever they say.
Exactly. But then we kind of put this out there, saying we're not looking for the finance committee endorsement or non-endorsement because we don't feel this is a financial situation or a financial issue.
Other comments, Nat, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm listening to everyone, and I just want everyone to go back. I know it's been like 5 years ago when this came up. I said numerous times that I want to support my board. I want my board to be in support together, regardless of how we individually feel about pieces and parts of this. As a discussion at town meeting was the point that was made at the time. It's just, when things grow on you, you start looking around, you start talking to people, things change. We have Act Now and all the, all of their new, new old, I call it, the 90s back in the 2000s. And so, I don't want to look like we're trying to do more, as John just said, the financial thing. I get what he's saying on that. That's kind of a third rail issue to even bring that up. I could bring up a lot of stuff about that. We don't have time for that. But at the same time, I don't want to lose that setback issue. I just want you all to know that I said that. I want to get that. Now, that could be changed at town meeting. It could be a new, we could scratch something, this and that. We don't know what's going to happen. So I want to support you guys in leaving it alone, if that's what we decide to do. I'm not going to do the abstain thing. I'm not going to do all that crap. I'm going to be in support of what you want. I'm just trying to bring things up as a group to think about.
We appreciate that, Nat.
Okay.
others who'd like to speak again?
Madam Chair.
Yes,
I mean, you could consider separating the ideas or putting a companion article that just deals with the setback, if that's something, that maybe there's more confidence there'll be support over the setback issue. We still have time. Remember, this is about the warrant at this point. So the articles that are being put back are the warrant articles, not necessarily the recommendations. Recommendations are subject to new hearings and new considerations. So we could sponsor a separate article. Again, I'm not saying that's what you want to do, but it's an option if you want to think about it.
well, that's what I was pondering, Andrew. It is complicated, I think, for folks who don't deal with the bylaws day in and day out to appreciate when you've got compound provisions, or even just looking at text of an amendment to understand what that means in plain English.
Yep.
On the other hand, I think we've seen before instances where we've got more than one provision addressing related issues. I think the first time we dealt with swimming pools, there were, when Fritz had drafted this, there were multiple dimensions to that, and it got people all tied up and confused. So I think what's here now is reasonably straightforward to have two parts, but if that is of interest to the board, I appreciate your saying you could draft it that way.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's a good, I mean, I was actually going to mention that, but I thought Andrew would give me the hairy eyeball on Zoom, so I didn't say anything, but I'm glad he said it. Because I didn't think that, how Andrew, sometimes the companion stuff is generally, sort of technical stuff, a town meeting, and usually gets announced and this and that. So I didn't want to, I wasn't sure.
Nat, that's why also I was asking about what districts that would apply to. And if that's the other thing, that if you separated it and it applied to R10 also, I think those same concerns about intruding on others.
Again, on the setback part, Judith, yes.
Exactly, so that it's conceivable you'd have two layers. One is setbacks that extend up to and through R10. And then the prohibition be limited to a smaller number of areas. That may be confusing. I don't know if that's helpful or not helpful.
Madam Chair, if I may. I think when we start to introduce different zonings, we're getting away from this. And I think where we might have a shot at getting this passed, people that are now affected in that the additional zoning are going to come out and be negative towards this. So I think what we've had and what we have and the revisions that we've made to kind of get this passable, I think we have our best shot. I don't think by introducing new zonings with more setbacks, people are going to gang up against us for that particular change. So just my thought, but
you'd leave it as is. Okay.
I would, my opinion.
Madam Chair.
Andrew, and then I think I see Campbell's hand.
I just want to be clear that the R10 is already 10 feet. So pools in R10 have to be set back 10 feet anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So really the districts that allow the 5 feet, so basically ROH and SOH, the pools aren't allowed, period. Okay, so swimming pools, not spas and hot tubs, but a swimming pool is not allowed in ROH or SOH where you have 5 foot setbacks. The other districts that have 5 foot setbacks are the ones we've included. So it's the R5, R1, R5 limited. The only other one I think that I saw on the list is the Sconset Residential 10, which is, again, that has a 5 foot, I think it's a side yard setback. And it's such a small district, I wouldn't include it at this time. Again, we've already got the districts included that have 5 feet. So the setback for pools in all the other districts are a minimum of 10 already. So what this is doing is just increasing that in the 5-foot setback areas.
Campbell, did I see your hand?
Yes, I was just going to say what Andrew said in terms of R10 is already a 10-foot setback. So, but he got to it first, so thank you for recognizing me.
Good call there, Campbell.
What I'm wondering is, based on the discussion, it sounds like the thrust of the board is to stick with what we have and to pursue it again. I think we probably need to refresh our thinking on what our recommendation is and why, and try to make that clearer, and some of what just came up about how this compares to other districts already, and some of that kind of thing maybe needs to be explained in there as well. So is it a fair reading? I'm just watching the time too. It's 10 after 3. Am I reading you correctly that the thrust of the group is to stick with what we have, try to beef up maybe the explanation, and go from there? Campbell, did I see your hand again?
No, Mom was just coming in, so I was waiting.
Tell your mom hello. Wave to Campbell's mom. Okay. All right. Is that the sense of the meeting? I don't think we need a formal vote. I'm not seeing any objections. Leslie and Andrew, is that clear enough as far as you're concerned?
Can I just ask one clarification?
Yeah.
So this article from last year obviously used the September 30th, 2021 date. So would we be updating that till, I mean, to September 2021?
I would.
We're going to be in 2021. Are you meaning 2022?
No, in last year's article, so it would have been voted in April, and it gave a period out till September 2020.
Okay, sorry.
So I'm asking, are we going to follow that same? Just we would have to update the September 2021.
I would think yes.
Okay.
Is that what everybody else would say?
No, I think I would agree, because I'd put it another way. I'd say, well, if we weren't, what issues does it cause to have a retroactive date? And that's the issue, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I don't object to changing the date.
Okay. I mean, that also helps, as you know, that people don't have a complete fire drill to run around and get permits before the date. So
I don't have any problem with that.
Any other comments on that? Okay, then out of the technical amendments, okay, storage containers is a primary use. Leslie, you thought we needed to get a little more firm on our ideas about whether to go with that or not, right?
Yes. You all have had several applications for properties with only storage containers. And I don't know if that was actually the intent when they were added, but that's what's in the bylaw. So the thought was you may want to add either that it can't be a primary use or add some additional standards or not. I just thought it was a good time for you all to talk about that.
Good idea.
We had a few applications come in, but there may be more coming.
Well, and it also, we've seen, I don't know whether this would be appropriate to address some of the issues we've had about consistent color or some of those kinds of things to list in any more detail. Maybe that's more than you want, but on the other hand, if we're going to be addressing storage containers, there may be a few other odds and ends on that. Leslie, is that germane, or would you rather not get into that?
No, I think those are good things to bring up.
Okay, have at it. John Trudell, you're Mr. Storage Container expert. So
Well, I agree with the color. I think that's something that's pretty straightforward. You don't want to have the rainbow fleet out there. So consistency with a standard color. And I'm not saying it has to be brown, green, or otherwise. But if you're going to have a color, make them all make them all consistent with the other units. And as far as screening, it comes before us. But there are different screenings for different areas of the island. When we look for, the Arrowhead, and we look for screening where it's all commercial, sometimes a more industrial screening is sufficient. If we're going to an area of like Marble Way and that has residential on one side, I think we have to be a little bit open to maybe landscaping screening or something like that. So as far as I'm all for putting in a color, that's pretty standard throughout the entire island. As far as the screening, if you're going to put something general in there, I would agree with, but I don't want to limit it to one form or another because it's
what about, would you allow containers as a primary use unto itself?
We have something before us now, and I think it makes it too easy. My opinion would not necessarily be that we can use it for a primary use, only because then we'll just start to see offices and things like that being dropped, and maybe not, for bathrooms and things like that. I'm not really quite sure if I agree necessarily with the primary use of those. I guess it really is, then the HCC gets involved. Is that something that we really want to see for a primary use? Then you have to, do you sidewall it? Do you roof it? Do you, I don't know. I think that's a little slippery slope that we're addressing by allowing it to be a primary use.
So you think not to allow it to be primary use?
Yeah, my initial would be no.
Okay. Others, Dave Iverson.
I think you're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. When you say that though, John, through you, Madam Chair, and you're saying through all districts, it shouldn't be primary?
No, that's what I mean. This is a little subjective, because when you look at the industrial area like Arrowhead, that potentially could be a place for it. But if you're going to be where Marblehead, you're going to be looking at it across the street in residential, it's very subjective. And that's why I said color is universal. I would agree with that. Screenage is a little debatable, subjective. Primary, it can be, but I would be hesitant to just say across the board, yes, it is, because then in certain areas it would have a right, and then it might not be a good thing.
You couldn't. I'm sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I think that we need to be targeted in very specifically targeted about where they can be the primary use, and not just let people run rampant with that.
I was going to ask Leslie and Andrew, when you've raised this, is there a district you were thinking that they might suitably be a primary use? I don't think you were saying they should be primary everywhere, but you may have a particular idea about where that's suitable that you'd want to share.
Well, no, but I can tell you right now, they're allowed by special permit in commercial neighborhood, C-Tech, commercial, industrial. That's it. So only in those 3 districts. Otherwise, they're prohibited.
And if, just for clarification, Leslie, sorry, they're allowed, but can they be primary or secondary where they have a special permit?
Yes, it's completely up to your discretion, but there's not a lot of language in the bylaw to really dictate that. I mean, the only language, here's the definition. an outdoor container such as fully enclosed semi-trailers, steel shipping containers, cargo containers, and the like, used for commercial storage of goods and materials that are not registered vehicles themselves, or situated on a registered trailer or attached to a registered vehicle. This definition does not apply to registered or unregistered boat trailers, registered vehicles, or sheds. So there's really no indication about the intent of it as accessory or not. And you have seen, you know, some applications where that's all that's proposed on the lot. And
Yeah.
we just thought it was worth a discussion if the board, you know,
Yeah.
wants to address it. Now's a good time before we, you know, continue getting applications.
Nat,
Madam Chair, I'm flipping back and forth here. Sorry about that. Leslie, this is reminding me of when we had the discussions about like the carpentry trailers, when they first got popular. Before you know it, you've got two of them in someone's yard taking up space and they're in the street. No, you know what I mean? Like, and then I want to ask you, what is the rule about sheds under a certain size? You don't need a permit. And then once you have a second one, you need a permit for it. What's that? I forgot how that works. 900 square feet, or whatever it is. I forgot.
So, Madam Chair, that's really a two-part question. So, under the building code, you don't need a building permit for a structure under 200 square feet for a shed.
200. Okay.
But for zoning, you get ground cover relief for one shed. Then after the one shed, anything after that counts towards your ground cover.
But you don't have to have like a permit for under 200 square foot. Like if you had three of them, now the other two count as ground cover.
Right. You have to get you have to get a use permit for them, but it's not subject to the building code.
Okay. And so when we get back on these containers, so here's a couple of things I've been thinking about tying it into sheds. We need to kind of like use our existing shed rules, I guess I'll call them. And I would suggest that 20-foot containers, not 40s. We should make a 40 a sort of a outside the zone, you know, the residential or whatever we're doing here. Leslie, you ever see a 40? It's a lot different than a 20. So that would be one thing to think about. And then another thing would be sort of, and this is stuff that you're good at figuring these things out, because I don't think we're going to figure it out right now, is maybe allowing one, you know, I'm not talking about ground cover now. That's a separate issue. I'm talking about like how far do we go to regulate these on residential lots? There's a lot of people have these carpenters. This sort of gets into my home occupancy discussion that we've had a couple of times in the last year, trying to find a way to not let these things get cluttery, but not make them where you can't have one without too much permitting. You know what I mean? And certainly not be able to stack them or, you know, create, you know, some craziness with them at the same time. I think that's what John was alluding to. Because we're taking away commercial zoning, mixed use, but we don't want to take away the ability for people to earn a living with a very, very, you know, small business that doesn't intrude on anyone. So that's sort of where I am with it. The color thing, I totally agree with, all that stuff. I just want to sort of clarify it with sheds to kind of use the shed issue as sort of a way to come on and develop a plan for us. Okay, so that's all I have.
that's helpful, Nat. Let's see, other thoughts. Kim.
Well, just in case, is everybody else done? I don't want to take up other people's time, but.
Go right ahead.
Okay, I know we spoke about this before, so again, I'd just like to say again, we should be thinking of this like in terms of creating guidelines so that it's easier for applicants to apply because they have a better idea of what the minimum requirements would be for a special permit. for storage containers. I think in the storage container definition that Leslie read, there is no implication in the verbiage there that primary use is allowable. I'm thinking of primary use relating to making it into an office, having a bathroom in it, having windows in it, perhaps. And I'm not sure how people feel about that. I also like the idea of creating different zones. Like, I think your commercial industrial is a different zone and should have different specifics, specific guidelines regarding screening or options regarding screening or the numbers that you can have. Whereas in more residential areas, you would think, that you would talk to some of the points that John had in terms of how many do you have per lot. I think that gets to Nat's thing with the sheds, what's your square footage allowance for a shed on a residential lot? Can you match that with the storage container sizing? And then just to throw back out there that I would still like to see fencing, whether it's landscape screening or commercial industrial fencing. I would like to see the height of the fencing match the height of the container. And 40-foot containers should be in commercial industrial versus C-Tech or commercial neighborhood. Those are just a couple of my thoughts. Thank you.
So Leslie, what I'm hearing, if this is fair, is a number of observations about kind of checklist points of review related to circumstance that could provide greater guidance to applicants and to help staff kind of guide what happens, but I'm not hearing anybody jump up and down and say, we want to have these be a primary use categorically. Is that fair? Is that what you're hearing too?
Not sure.
Well, I'm not sure, but I certainly feel like there's a little bit more direction than the last time that you all discussed this. And, could certainly put together like a informational type sheet guidelines for applicants to follow based on, some of this, but it would still be, topics for you all to discuss during a public hearing, just like you do now.
Right.
So there wouldn't be any real changes, just advice for people, I suppose.
Another thing
Yes,
to add,
yes.
Judith and Leslie, thank you for that. And thank you all of you for this. This is important. I didn't realize we were going to be talking about this. This is sort of like one of those things. If we come up with the right sort of, I don't like to say rules, but sort of reasonable way to have review of these things. It's really a review of each use, where it is and all that kind of stuff. There's going to be people permitting them that already have them, stuff like the tertiaries were and when they first started, stuff like that. But primary use needs a little more clarity for me. Never thought of it that way before. I don't think we should be doing that in residential zoning. However, if somebody has, I don't know, what would that be, Leslie, if they don't have any building, living, dwelling on the property, it's just an open lot? Is that what that means?
So they're not allowed in residential districts now. It's only the 3 commercial districts. So, you've seen 2 applications for, only storage containers on a lot in the former Coffin Pit. And, while that location may be okay for that, you all have authorized one of those so far. There are other locations where it may not be. And there's not language in the bylaw that I think would really back up your position if you were to deny that. You know,
Right.
I guess my thought was, do you want to make the language stronger or not? And I'm not hearing strong support for that. I mean, if it's something that you all would like for me to work on, I'm happy to work up some language, but if you're not interested in it, then I have other things to spend time on.
Well, Leslie, I would say when I think about Marble Way, remember when we initially had the proposal for storage containers there, and the neighbors all said, oh no, that'd be awful, and now there's something that's even more questionable in their opinion or whatever. So
Yep.
it's really tricky to know, you know, in terms of compatibility, how you judge that in the abstract in advance before some of these areas begin to be more fully developed. For me, I think there may be times, I mean, just primarily coming off that experience, that there may be times where I guess it's a question of storage containers versus storage buildings. If, as we've talked about, there can be aesthetic and buffer type controls, then at some point, storage containers and storage buildings have certain similarities to them. I remember being in Christchurch, New Zealand after their earthquake, and they were using cargo containers as places for pop-up stores, and everything else is kind of an emergency circumstance that you can really see how kind of the point Nat was making about how what seemed to be mobile uses or something like that, or temporary uses, gradually turn into something else. So I don't know. Part of what would be on my mind, and I don't know if you can answer this or have any basis to, but I see that we're really down a quart in terms of boat storage, because we've had people trying to cram boats in places that we wouldn't have anticipated. I don't know what the driver is economically in terms of storage containers, whether that's primarily for landscaping, whether that's for storage, whether that's for certain kinds of uses. So I don't feel like I can make an informed decision in terms of, do we need more of this such that we should allow it to be primary, meaning in my mind predominant, build for that rather than kind of ancillary around the edges. Do you have any idea about like the demand or the need for storage containers?
I know there are a lot of storage containers around that have not been properly permitted. I believe most of those are probably in existing commercial districts with some outliers. A lot of the ones that have come in for permits have been as a result of an enforcement order.
Mm-hmm.
And there are others that are out there that have not come in. I mean, I think there is a strong demand for those because, you know, it's portable storage, it's inexpensive storage. The cost of construction of an actual building is very expensive, and it's a way for people to get around that and not have to commit to a structure being there forever.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like secondary house rental. It's like you can do what you're doing and then have some added bonus income, probably, I would imagine.
I don't know if it's being used for that or not, but.
Madam Chair, I have a thought.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if there, you know, maybe we should think about a limit, like, you know, only so many storage units. You know, I think that one of the concerns that I remember was that, you know, too many of them end up not looking like Nantucket. And, you know, after a certain point, you know, you may have to move to a building. I don't know. It's just, you know, that if you're starting a business and you want, you know, you don't want to invest in all kinds of structures, maybe that makes sense, but at a certain point, you know, you can't just keep adding those. They don't really match the character here.
So for the board, Dave, you get your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, and you guys probably gonna look at me funny, but I mean, in all honesty, I mean, I don't think that there's any reason to have it as a primary use anywhere else but maybe the CI district. And then for the other commercial style districts that they're allowed, I think that we should have some pretty strict guidelines about how many, where they sit, and color and screening. And that's that.
Okay, so your idea would be possibly to say that it's permissible for them to be a primary use in the CI district,
Mm-hmm.
but only that,
As a primary use.
as
Yeah.
a primary use. Andrew and Leslie, do you have any reaction to that?
I guess one thought is that, you know, a primary use doesn't require it to be, you know, anything but what it is. I mean, if it's the only use on the lot, so if it's just storage units, it's the primary use. It doesn't have to have offices and bathrooms and all that other stuff. I guess I would tend to agree. Certainly the C-Tech, it should be accessory to something else maybe that's going on. And probably CN too, I think.
So can I just ask, God,
Yeah.
I can't believe we're getting into we're not in the weeds, but we're definitely getting into the higher grass. I do have another question though, Andrew. So let's say somebody had a shop, just a garage, like a workshop. Would the container be a secondary use? Because it's not like a living, you know, they live there. I understand what David's saying. I agree with him. I just don't want to like create a new problem. That's all I'm thinking. I understand your point about C-Tech because you know where we've changed it from RC2. There's already dwellings. There's already tons of development on those lots. So that's definitely, I get that. We don't have any fresh, brand new RC2 around. However, if somebody has a shop or something that's not where they live, would that be secondary use? You know, I'm just asking.
Isn't it ancillary?
So the shop would be the primary use in that case, and then
Okay,
the storage unit would be accessory to the shop use.
so it would be fine then, because like
Right.
Perry Lane, there's a lot of different places that people don't live, but they have shops. Okay,
The
Cool.
issue of it being a primary use would be the lot contains only one or
Nothing.
two or three of these
yeah,
metal containers only.
yep, got it. Okay, that's all I need to know. Got it. Thank you. I'm in agreement then with that. Just needed to understand that.
Okay, just to take our pulse one more time. So is there support, both staff and board, to do what Dave suggested, to ask Leslie to consider drafting something allowing these as primary use in CI district, but that still would be subject to special permit review, right?
Yes.
Then in
Please.
addition, to have drafted some more nuanced listing of factors taken into account in reviewing storage containers in all the places where they are permitted with a special permit. Is that where we're coming out?
Madam Chair, I do think the size issue, I mean, the size discussion is something we should include as well.
So tell me what you're hearing on that. I heard the distinction between 20 and 40.
That the 20 might be more suitable, again, in the CN and C-Tech districts, because again, those are 7,500 and 10,000 square foot lots mixed with other uses.
That
Whereas,
makes sense.
yeah, whereas the 40 footers are really more appropriate in an industrial setting.
So I guess three pieces here then, limiting, I guess that may mean you'll need some kind of, class 1 and class 2 storage container. You're gonna need to define storage container somehow differently, or
In the definition.
specify in the listing for those other districts. Everybody understand where we're at on that? Are we in agreement? Campbell, do I see your hand?
Yep.
Yeah, I just have a quick question regarding the 40-foot storage containers. That's, from what I have seen anyway, commercial industrial has different lot sizes, correct? So not 40 footers aren't going to fit on every lot out there. Is that correct?
The minimum size lot in industrial is 15,000. 15,000 square feet.
Okay. But then I'm trying to think, like, if it's can be the primary use for the lot, do you get like 4 of those things? And now you know, to your point about square footage, what are we thinking of?
Yeah, you're allowed 50% coverage in the industrial. So you could have those unless we think about, a maximum number.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
What I would, Fritz? You're muted, Fritz. Fritz, you're muted. Were you speaking?
Yeah, I'm sorry. A thought occurred to me, and to clarify what we're talking about. My recollection is we've either had a application before us, or maybe it's even still pending, but there was a question of the containers. I think it was maybe Champion. The containers, but what use would the containers be? So in this discussion, is there a limitation as to what the container can be used for? Let me give an example. So we talk about storage. So it could be, storage for gardening materials, landscaping materials, other types of materials, tires, whatever. But there was one discussion of, I think this is because it was only going to have containers, and there's some discussion of whether the container would be used as an office. And I don't remember how that came out, but I'm just throwing it out there for discussion. I don't have an opinion one way or the other, but is that something that's presently limited now? And I guess the question would be, should we limit it in some way? To some extent, you end up, it can't be used as a residence because it wouldn't meet health code. I don't know what happens when you get to an office, but go ahead.
Yeah, they are in Providence, Rhode Island. I went to one.
I could believe anything's in Providence.
So, Madam Chair, I had actually flagged that as a potential issue with that application. Our definition specifically says that they're to be used for commercial storage of goods and materials.
Right.
And that the emphasis is on storage. So say it's landscape materials, people can't go and purchase and take it home from there, right? That would not be commercial use.
Well, I guess that depends on how it's structured, but
well, it just once Fritz takes us down this path, I could imagine. I think probably we do better to let you folks try to draft based on the discussion, and instead of us trying to come up with a parade of more screwy examples of what could happen in Providence or elsewhere.
okay, we'll work on something for you all to discuss.
And any last thoughts though before we put this aside for the moment?
Just one quick thing, Judith, I didn't mean to bring up the 40 footers like it's common. They're not that common. I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that the 20s are the 90% of the of the containers that people use, because you can move them with a tow truck. Those ramp trucks can pick them up and pull them on. I just wanted to make sure of that. That's all I was trying to say.
Ned, I'm grateful you would raise it. It frankly had me thinking about the fact that probably once upon a time there were warehouse storage
There's a few.
for food here or things like that. And come the pandemic, come the climate change, come the end of the world, whatever, you know, who knows how big, what kind of containers and where they'll be and whatever. So I think that's all worth raising.
Madam Chair?
Okay. Yes.
Just one more, Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
And I like the idea of Leslie maybe drawing up something for us to look at and maybe tweaking it or giving her comments about. And I only bring this up to add to that. Maybe we also have to consider when you make it into a primary, if it becomes an office, whether it has a bathroom or no bathroom, how many people are going to be employed there, because then you take a storage area and turn it into almost a retail area where you might have customers coming in, such as the applicant that we're having. And then we have to look at the parking requirements for each employee, retail person coming there, and also as well as a handicap spot. Now we're looking at an industrial area that was maybe meant to be for storage units, and now it becomes a business, and now we have all the restrictions that we have to put in as far as parking and access. So it's just, this could become a bigger thing than it is.
Yep. Okay. Any other last words? Campbell?
I just have one of the crazy ideas. I think I would definitely emphasize the storage aspect of it. To John's point, if you're going to get into more of a retail thing, I think at that point, the owner, lessor, whatever, needs to look at investing in an actual structure, because they'll need sewer or some form of pump out for the bathroom, et cetera, et cetera. And that should be maybe where we draw a line to formalize where it's no longer a storage container and you need an actual structure for it. The one storage piece I was putting in that I was probably crazy, but thinking about different chemicals that can be stored, and maybe non-explosive chemicals for storage as a thought.
Well, and then there's always the if it's in, as we've seen out by the airport, worries about breaches into the aquifer and whatever. So I'd have to say, Leslie, if this is more than is feasible for this town meeting, we'd understand if it comes up in 2022. If you want to tell us that, we hope we've given you something helpful here, but we know we're asking a lot. So
all right.
I think that was pretty much all that you wanted us to really zero in on today, right?
Yes.
And our time is about to expire. So just to remind everybody, our regular meetings Monday at 4. I invite anybody to give me suggestions. It's kind of halfway through the year in terms of, we're using Zoom a lot, and I welcome any suggestions for how process for the meetings could be made more effective, how I could be a better chair, whatever. Anything from staff that you want to add for the good and welfare here?
I would just say I thought this was a good meeting. It was helpful. So thank you all.
It was good to have that kind of concentrated time, wasn't it?
It was.
Yep.
And how are we doing, Judith, on the and staff on the consent? Are we doing consent yet, or are we waiting till?
No, good. Thank you, Nat. So you'll see when Megan's working hard on the agenda, and we appreciate it. For both secondary dwellings and ANRs, I think that's the bulk of them. We'll be using a consent agenda format. That means if you want to pull something off for discussion, be prepared to do that at the beginning. The thing is, the Zoom meetings take so much more energy than you would think. And
No, yeah, we don't want to clog up anybody else's road. I got it. You're right.
And
Okay.
that means too, those are the kind of things we've been dealing with in our once upon a time separate meetings. There are things that alternates don't get to vote on and whatever. So that part of the meeting should go more quickly. Best we can tell this agenda, the biggest thing is likely to be 31 Fairgrounds. So get ready to take another look at that. The Marble Way has been deferred one more time. And then there's various other things. Megan, you want to tell us anything else?
Oh, I was just going to say, as you're reviewing all the materials, I'm doing my best to try and continue to get these things out as early as possible. We're here to help. So feel free, if you have any questions, please, please, please reach out. Not to interfere with any discussion that you have amongst yourselves, but if there's staff level questions that we can have addressed for you in advance of the meeting, we're more than happy to do that.
And we appreciate the work that goes into the staff report. That really helps us. Okay, thank you, everybody, and have a good evening. And Nat, time for
Thank you.
departure for your next meeting. Don't raise the
Thank you.
fees too much. Take care. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Let's see. Dave moved and who seconded? No, John
Fritz.
moved.
Nat and Fritz.
Nat and Fritz. Roll call. Dave,
Aye.
Fritz,
Bye.
Nat,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Judith, aye. Thank you, and thanks again to the staff. We really appreciate your weathering all these storms, and we're glad you're safe, and we hope you stay that way. Okay.
Thank
take care.
you. Thank
Hello,
you.
thank
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.